So Amber, I see you logged in twice.
Yeah, it looks like
Is
my
is one of them you?
one of them is me. One of them is my delightful boss,
Okay.
Councilmember Brady.
Okay. Just checking.
How you doing, Wayne? I'm here.
Good. So we actually do have a quorum, and so at 7:04, and I'd like to call the meeting to order. I want to welcome everyone to the November 2022 meeting. My name is Wayne Benjamin, and I chair land use for Manhattan Community Board 12. It seems like for the last 2 or 3 land use committee meetings, we have welcomed new committee members, and this meeting is no different. Aisha Ogilvy, who is not a new board member, but she is new to the land use committee. So Aisha, why don't you say hello? Hi, Aisha, can't hear or see you. So we'll come back to Aisha. So
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. So having the mic plugged in is very crucial.
Yes, that's true.
So I said a spiel. My name is Aisha Ogilvy. I've been on the community board, I believe, 9 years now. Served on differing committees. First time on land use. Hello.
Vivian.
My name is Vivian Ducat. I was a full member. I think I started on this committee when I was a full member about, I don't know, 15 years ago. And then Wayne kindly made me a public member where I continued on that way.
Yeah. Actually, I think it was the board chair who made you a public member. Jim.
Hello, I'm Jim. I'm a long-term member of the board, as you might be able to discern by looking at me.
Daniel.
Hello, my name is
Daniel, you just muted yourself.
Sorry. Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm on land use committee, and I'm on also parks and cultural affairs committee. I'm an artist. I live in the neighborhood. I've been here for all my life. Yeah.
James, the other James Bosley. Now that we have 2 of them.
Hi, I'm new to the board and hence new to the committee as well. I'm also on the aging committee. I don't know how I got on that one, but I've Inwood resident for 20 years.
Thank you. Tanya, are you still with us?
Yes, I am. Tanya Bonner, board member, community board for 5 years. I'm also on the Health and Environment Committee with Steve Simon, who's also on this committee.
Yes.
And welcome, Aisha. I hope you all can hear me okay. I'm not taking off my mask. I'm on a bus. And it's a cesspool of disease because a lot of people are not wearing masks. But anyway.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. So we'll get into the agenda. We have 2 agenda items in addition to whatever old and new business. One of the agenda items from the October meeting, which got deferred till the November meeting, was our discussion. Hey, Steve, how are you? Steve, you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yes, I'm Steve Simon. I'm a member of this committee.
Great.
And somebody here is identified as Amber Moore, but doesn't look at all like her.
Yeah, I know. It's it's the magic of Hollywood. So getting to that, as I was saying, in our October meeting, we had an agenda item that was the committee's opportunity to discuss, planning and zoning priorities with Councilman Sean Abreu. That got rescheduled to November, and we're happy to have the councilman, with us, and as well as his staffer, Amber Moore, who I think I met both of them on the streets when we were doing the Coogan's street co-naming. So welcome, Councilman. And, why don't we give you the opportunity to, take the floor first and share with us some of the things that, you are looking at and, advocating for vis-a-vis, planning and zoning, and then the committee can sort of chime in and, talk about some of the things we've been talking about for the last few years.
Yeah, well, thank you, Wayne, and to the members of this committee. It's a pleasure for me to be here and to hear your voices and hear what your, more about your plan, the plan that's been in the works for the past few years. Looking more than anything to just listen to hear what you've been up to, and where the plan is, where it stands. At the council level, we've done a lot when it comes to championing cleaner and safer streets. We have taken the war on rats. I don't know if you have seen that. Reducing the amount of time that trash sits on our street is something we've been working on. We passed the bill I sponsored, which is our city's premier law on making sure we're tracking interstate flow of guns as they come into our city, to figure out where they're coming from and make sure we're publishing this report. So we're also placing a spotlight on bad actors, so we can know who are these manufacturers and dealers who are involved with guns in crime. And so those are some of the things we're working on at the council level. With respect to housing, we are strong supporters of affordability and making housing available for folks in the city. There are a lot of projects coming before the council now, and I think the council needs to send a strong message that we're a city of yes when it comes to affordable housing. I was evicted as a child. That's been important to me. Became a tenant lawyer, keeping families in their homes. And I know what it's like to comfort families in housing court when they're on the verge of losing their homes, and what it takes for them to really achieve housing stability. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing about your plan, and hear about what steps are to come. At the council level, the maps yesterday were adopted, by the way. So from 155 to 165 east of Broadway will no longer be in my district. It'll actually be absorbed by Carmen de la Rosa. From 165 to 155th west of Broadway, it's in my district. It stays in my district. East of Broadway is now absorbed by District 10. So, a lot of these issues will, have to be done in tandem with Carmen, because Carmen, District 10 has seen has suffered the largest population loss. There has been a lot of folks that have been leaving, especially to the West Bronx from Washington Heights. So that means that Carmen, just by law, Carmen had to absorb another like 25, 30,000 going south. So I lost a lot. But I think the way it was done the best way possible, because there was she couldn't go to the Bronx. She had no other place to go other than going south into our district. Yeah. So there's something for you to know for background.
Yeah, and we had the pleasure of speaking with Carmen earlier this year, and sharing with her some of the things that we were talking about vis-a-vis planning, and her also sharing with us what she's working on. And it was great because she stayed for the entire meeting. So the things that we will share with you tonight, I'm pretty certain she's heard about, and if not, she'll hear about them again. And you mentioned on a couple of occasions, you wanted to hear about the plan we're working on, and we don't have a plan that we're working on, at the moment. I've shared with city planning and the borough president's office, and I believe with Amber, that the community board and city college worked on a district-wide neighborhood planning and land use study that we completed circa 2007. That plan and the executive summary of the plan is accessible on CB12's website. And a lot of the issues that came out of that planning study are still relevant today. Obviously, affordable housing was one of them. And I believe it was at the general meeting last month, I mentioned to Amber that one of the things, at least in my perspective, and I believe the committee agrees, that the council needs to pay close attention to is what HPD and others are doing vis-a-vis affordable housing. Because the 3 projects or so that we've looked at, and then some of that I've looked at in articles in East Harlem and Central Harlem, the lower end of affordability is like $70,000 or $73,000 household income. And if the average median income in Community Board 12 is around 50 or 52, then those affordable housing projects are like 50% above that. So it's really not affordable in Washington Heights, East Harlem, which is where I grew up. So it's kind of missing the mark consistently.
I agree.
And in the second agenda item tonight is, sort of our discussion of the City of Yes zoning text amendment. And in looking at that, some of the ideas are conceptually okay, but when you look at some of the push for apartment sizes that are not family friendly, they're not livable in terms of the square footage. We need to better understand, what some of these things mean. So affordable housing is clearly something that the community board has been looking at, but we're looking at affordable housing that makes sense given the household income here.
Yeah.
Also coming out of that planning study was a focus on neighborhood preservation and historic preservation, but also, and this is something that came up in discussions with the borough president's office in the last month or so, it wasn't focused on sort of shrink wrapping the community, which is a term I love, so that nothing can grow. There are maps that identify areas where, more density might be accepted, and other areas where you want to preserve, the scale of a neighborhood. And logically, you've got, major avenues. In some cases, you're near transportation hubs, and there are places that make sense. Whereas if you're in the middle of a residential block and everything is like a 5-story building or a brownstone, that may not be the best location for a 17-story building. So, I mean, it looked at that. 421A, which, the community board has looked at a couple of times and has, similar to the discussions of affordable housing, said, we understand the need for real estate tax, programs. It is expensive to build in New York City, and anyone who has done that understands it. Anyone who hasn't done it needs to check on it. But the history of the program shows that something like 90% of the projects that have benefited from 421A have really been market rate units, and maybe 10% have been, affordable. And the notion of having 421 go away was not something we advocated for, but we certainly advocated for greater focus being on giving those benefits to projects where the affordable units were far outnumbered or had a greater percentage than what heretofore, has been the case.
Yep, that's great. I with respect to the points about you call it shrink locking?
Shrink wrapping.
Sorry, wrapping. No, I mean, yeah, I think that's the kind of conversation that, if where I do think there are places where it's appropriate and other places where, we could have the conversation. And I think that's definitely the attitude that we should bring forward. But to your point about 421A, I also agree. 421A, it's a big issue. I'm hoping the replacement comes very soon, and that's one that actually works, because the issue is that 421 doesn't really favor affordability. I hate it as a state mechanism for affordable housing. I hate it a lot. I'd rather that HPD uses term sheets that are actually achieving true affordability. Like you said, it's unacceptable that, look, families making $70,000 also aren't rich, but we also need to make sure that we're also bringing housing to folks with lower AMI and folks making $30,000 or $40,000 a year. So I agree with you there, Wayne.
Yeah, and the other thing that we have been talking about, we meaning the Land Use Committee and community residents in the board for probably the last year and a half or so, is the area from 155th to 177th, which it sounds like half of that is now Carmen's and half of it is yours?
It might be, I may only have actually a fourth of it now because literally half of 155 to 165 is actually going to Carmen. The other half
Okay.
is me. So Carmen will have 3/4 of that. I have a fourth of that.
Okay, so for some reason, that area west of Broadway is zoned R8, whereas like everything else in the community, both north of 177th Street and east of Broadway is zoned R7-2. And the difference in density that's allowed between the two is almost, 100%. You can get like 3.4 density in a R7-2, and you can get a 6.02 in an R8. And that's an area when Scott Stringer was borough president, there was a soft site analysis done because no one thought that that area would be threatened much by development. But the soft site analysis pointed out that because of the R8 zoning, even though it's a well built up area, as you will know, many of the buildings are 50 to 75% under what can be built as of right. And as the market gets more attractive, and I think the average rent in Manhattan is now $5,000 a month, which is crazy. But as the development market gets more attractive, some sites may become, development sites, even though they're built up or small. And that has proven to be the case for a building that dates back to, I think the 1800s, which is like, I think 857 Riverside, which is a wood frame house that should be designated. It's got links possibly to the Underground Railroad. It was built by abolitionists, but that's basically a 2-story, house where the development is, I think, 17 stories tall, or maybe 14, because a block away from there's a series of brownstones, 158th Street, that once again should have been in the Audubon Park Historic District when it was designated in 2009, because they're actually older than the apartment buildings that are in the district. But once again, those are a series of brownstones, and 3 or 4 of them have now been purchased by a developer, and the proposal there is for like a 14 or 17. I forget, one building is 14 stories, one building is 17. And that's kind of my example of you're in these mid-block locations. It's not on Broadway, in which case it might be fine, because we have some 10 and 12 story pre-war buildings on Broadway. And because of floor to ceiling heights, a 14-story building probably will be shorter than those. But these are mid-block locations where it feels absolutely, inappropriate in terms of scale. And for maybe 10 years, the community board has been asking city planning to look at, rezoning certain areas so that what can be built is, compatible with what's there. So it's not saying that you can't build anything there, but it should kind of fit in with what's there. And, there really has been no action on that, which is what brings us to the point now where we're looking at these buildings that are, dramatically out of scale, with the neighborhood. And then folks are going to say to the community board, how did you let this happen? And it's not that we let it happen. It's that, the actions that could be taken that would have, encouraged development that's consistent with the rest of the neighborhood scale didn't follow. So, I mean, that's the point that we wanted to talk about with you earlier today. I mean, earlier this year.
Yeah, no, I heard you. I hear you on that. Are you thinking of pursuing a neighborhood rezoning?
Well,
and who would be the applicant?
Yeah, it wasn't the whole neighborhood. It was basically, and we did pass a resolution asking city planning to just rezone that R8 area. So we understand from years ago that rezoning an entire neighborhood or community board is a big undertaking. And that's something that, city planning probably just can't take on like that. We were asked maybe a decade or more ago, because this is just after the rezoning in CB9 that was spurred by the Manhattanville project was completed. We were asked to identify the area that we wanted city planning to concentrate on. And once again, there's a resolution that we can send to you. The area that was identified was between 181st and Dykeman. And that's because in that area, we were receiving lots of applications, for BSA waivers for buildings that were 2 or 3 times the as of right, which was just, crazy. So I said, let's start there. That never happened. What happened instead was the inward rezoning, which is not something we ever asked for. And I understand that Councilman Rodriguez was interested in a rezoning that was east of 10th Avenue. It wasn't all of Inwood. And his focus was really on more things that would spur economic development. But somehow that got lost and we got this inward rezoning instead. So we did ask city planning to look at, that area from, 181st to Dykeman. That didn't happen. More recently, and for very similar reasons, we asked for this R8, and it's the only R8 area, with the exception of one small block front, which doesn't really matter because it was rezoned years ago to facilitate a NYCHA building, which is done. But this R8 area from 155th to 177th, is an integral part of, what you would think of as the scale and character of Washington Heights. And, given development activity where it is now, it can and is being threatened by, development. So that is the more, recent request.
Okay, and you're saying this is west of Broadway?
Yeah, because it's strictly a function of, in 1960 or 61, when, the zoning was redone, for whatever reason, and it's actually the same is true in CB9, the area west of Broadway is R8, and the area east of Broadway is R7-2. When CB9 did their rezoning, I think they've done 2 since then, and which makes me jealous because they've done 2 and we've done none. They actually had a really thoughtful, if you can imagine, a quilt or a patchwork quilt, so that the zoning matches the scale and character of the existing buildings. So if you're familiar with like Convent Avenue, which has like lovely landmark brownstones, R7-2 would be too dense for that area. So it was kind of down zoned to something more the scale of, brownstones. I think Broadway might have been upzoned. I think Riverside Drive, it wasn't upzoned, but if you know Riverside Drive, I think you could do a 14-story building along Riverside, which would not be, out of context. So it's not the same zoning all over, West Harlem. It sort of matches the difference in scale of the buildings. And we said that made perfect sense for Washington Heights because, the Jamel Terrace area is very different than, the Audubon Park area.
Let me ask you a question.
3 more buildings. Sure.
So what about on 161, 600 West 161st, for instance, is a 10-floor building? You wouldn't argue that buildings surrounding there should be the same height there?
You mean on Broadway?
Yeah.
Well,
that's where Dave Crenshaw lives.
Well, yeah, but that's exactly my point. If you walk along Broadway, even here at 155th by the subway, there are existing buildings that date back to World War I or so that are of decent size. They might only be for pre-war, 10 or 12 stories, but given new construction, you're not going to have 9 and 10 foot, ceiling heights. A 12 or 14 story building might be fine. And if you look at the planning study, it's like along Broadway and Amsterdam and parts of St. Nick are areas that identified where, greater density might be okay. You've got areas where at the corner of a major 2-way avenue and a street, you've got a 1-story supermarket that occupies, probably a 10,000 square foot site. you could build an apartment building there and have a supermarket on the ground floor. But all of the air rights that are sitting there unused at the moment can be put to use.
Right.
So it's that kind of thinking that, we want to encourage.
Right. Because I could see, I think 161st and Broadway is a soft site. There's that supermarket and that's it. And on top of it, there's literally nothing. I've always seen it as a place where I'm always concerned about what could happen there. But I guess I just want to have, I'm thinking about this. I haven't made up my mind. This is a very tough issue because right now the climate in the council right now is, I'm not saying this is NIMBY. I'm not saying that at all, right? But that we're trying to. I think that the goal is to create as much affordable housing as possible. Of course, within of course, it is somewhat contextual would be the goal, right? But I think that right now the climate right now is affordable housing in the council. I just want to be able to find that avenue in this plan.
Yeah. Well, and I also want the other committee members to chime in. But the community board, the land use committee, is interested in affordable housing, as I said, and we want it to be affordable to like neighborhood residents. And there are programs. The Inwood Library Project, for example, they're using HPD's, Ella, which is extremely low income program. The income band there actually makes sense. The income band that's being used for some of the other projects where at the lower end of affordability is like 70,000. Really, you're absolutely right. If you make 70,000 in New York City, that's not a lot of money. And we're not saying that there shouldn't be apartments that are affordable, but if you have to make at least 70 or 70 in order to afford even a studio, it's kind of missing the point.
Right.
And the notion of identifying sites that make sense for development is something we did as part of the planning study. I'm sure it's something that we'd be more than happy to work with others to look at again. And what you mentioned is, there are 1 or 2 story buildings on, Broadway or Amsterdam, basically on major avenues where the new construction would not have the same impact. If you can imagine, if you shifted a 10 or 12 story building from 161st and Broadway over to, Fort Washington Avenue,
right?
It's a very different impact. There's a certain scale to Fort Washington that, which is not to say that a new building there can't be a couple stories taller, but twice the size is,
right.
And many of these buildings are coming in at twice the size or 3 times the size.
Yeah, no, I hear that. I was born and raised on 161st in Fort Washington. I know the neighborhood very well. So I understand. I understand where you're coming from. I'm just concerned if the goals because the planning folks. Sorry, I'm forgetting him. The planning folks for the city. Is the goal is for them to do it like on their own accord to do this plan? Like the goal is to convince them to do some kind of plan. Because, for instance, what happened in Manhattan, what happened in Morningside, a group came together, right? Morningside Heights Community Coalition, and they submitted a plan, right? I'm now the applicant of that plan, by the way. I'm just like, is the goal, is it to have an organization put out a plan or to tell the planning folks of the city to do it through your encouragement? Because I'm just trying to figure out what the means is to accomplishing.
Well, that's a good point. And I think we've discussed the 2 or 3 options in the past. We were asked, and we did identify for city planning, the request to rezone that R8, and they said, well, give us a sense of which contextual zoning districts you would be interested in. And early this year, we brainstormed and shared, some thoughts with it. It was pointed out that the rezoning that was done in CB9 that I referenced, Scott Stringer was the applicant. So the community board did a 197A plan that was very well received, but as you know, 197A plans have no force of law. So Scott took some of the goals, and objectives of that 197A plan. And I believe the Manhattan Borough President's Office was the applicant for that rezoning. And we mentioned to Mark Levine's staff, maybe that's a role, that, they can play, because I think, the Manhattan Borough President's Office or any borough president's office, would get more traction than the community board asking city planning to do something. Sometimes, we get a response, sometimes we don't. The borough president's office or, the council reps, have more clout with city planning than we do. And that in fact may be the better way to go. The community board, the land use committee is more than happy to be part of the brain trust saying this is what we're looking at, but it might make sense for the applicant to be, someone or some entity that has greater pull.
Got it. Yeah, because I mean that definitely impacts the scope of the project and how it works out. But listen, I'm glad you were able to shed light on your position, Wayne, and the land uses position here. It's clear you spent time on this. I haven't made up, but my mind on what this looks like. I have to give it a lot more thought. But I just wanted to hear you guys, and I heard you guys loud and clear.
Committee members, we've waited to speak with the councilman. What would you like to share? I can't believe they're being shy. Vivian, Tanya?
Am I allowed to speak?
Yes, you raised your hand and so did Tanya, so. Okay.
Right. I actually wanted to ask, and I'm not sure if this is appropriate within land use, whether you're would be able to return to organic recycling mulch, on the.
Hey, planning initiatives. What have we been talking about for planning and zoning now that we have him?
I wanted to actually comment that it's interesting because everything east of Broadway is built in a very contextual way. I've noticed there's something new on like 158th or 9th on the northwest corner on Amsterdam. There are a few buildings on 158th and St. Nicholas that have been built. And it's curious that where you're saying that you could have more height, that's where you're getting like 4- and 5-story buildings max.
Got it.
Have you seen, by the way, just so that from our concern, and I know it's out of your district, I think, the 28-story building that went up on 153rd between Broadway and Riverside?
That is my district. But when was that constructed?
They're still on it. I see it at my
being built now.
Yeah.
It's almost, I mean, they've reached the height, but there's still elevators going up and down it that I can see.
Got it. I don't know enough of the project to comment on that. Riverside, if it's on Riverside Drive, I mean, I don't have enough to formulate a position.
It's actually not on Riverside. It's in the mid block. But going to my point, it's west of Broadway, so it's in the part of CB9 that's zoned R8. And I don't know what the site is. I don't know if they bought air rights. But the point is, you've got a 27, 28-story building now in the middle of the block of, an area where, except for Riverside Drive, the buildings are, maybe 5 or 6 stories tall. And even the larger pre-war buildings in Riverside are only like 10 to 12. So that's a perfect example of something that is twice the size of even the biggest buildings on Riverside Drive. And it's sitting in the middle of the block.
And I don't think there's any affordable housing connected with it. That I know of. There's community space that hasn't been assigned downstairs, and that's all from what I've learned.
Yep. Tanya.
Not ideal, Vivian. Thank you.
Yes, I just wonder, as the Inwood rezoning is a done deal, right? There are a lot of concerns around what now can be allowed as far as development. And already we've seen, especially since the lifting of some of the, COVID restrictions, we see a lot of new developments that are popping up like dominoes. My question to you is, how do you see yourself and your fellow council members? What is your plan to ensure that the new developments that keep popping up, some that is as of right, some that are not, some that try to get around things, certain regulations, to ensure that what all the new developments that unfortunately are going to come up, some of which will not be contextually appropriate for our community, to ensure that there will be appropriate accountability and pushback on these particular projects. And because, as of course, the community board is only advisory, we only can do so much. The real power of obviously is not with us. It is with you all. So how do you see yourself, pushing back, or what is the plan to address this? The making sure that the inward rezoning that many of our people in our community fought against, that the developments that will be coming out of that will be appropriate for this community. Is there a plan for that? Is there a sort of visioning that's taking place? What's happening, and what is going to be the assurance?
I think at the end of the day, thank you for your question, Tanya. At the end of the day, I think the city needs to really take on comprehensive citywide planning. Right now, we're addressing it on a ad hoc, case-by-case basis, which I don't think is the way. If the speaker or the mayor, take this head on, I think that we can address the city's cumulative housing crisis much more effectively. I will say, however, that there was a research that came out by the Furman Research Group that said that the addition of a fair market value of housing doesn't actually increase the rent for surrounding neighborhoods. So I think that increasingly the additional height of buildings, I think that argument of placing people out of their, displacing folks, is actually not going to be as effective over time. I think that's where the council is seeing things at the moment. That being said, there are appropriate concerns like mid-block, super talls that are not bringing any affordable housing. That's something that is, I think is nonsensical. But at the end of the day, we have to add density throughout our city. It is a position that I take, but it needs to be done in a very respectful manner. There are over 60,000 people that are homeless on any given basis. And yes, if I have to take a hard vote and I'm elected out of office because I'm producing affordable housing for folks that need it most, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, because Harlem. People said it was look at Harlem. It's 116 is unrecognizable. Frederick Douglass is unrecognizable. It's actually insulting to me, even though I don't live there. But historically and things like that, it's very insulting what's going on there. So that's the concern. And I see this community. That's where this is going. And so it's yes, we do need the density, as you're saying, because there needs to be more development. But the concern is this is opening the door, to development that is not appropriate, for this community, and also not even bringing affordable housing, because
that's my problem is when you have these luxury super talls that aren't bringing affordable housing at all, because then at that point now that who's that serving? It's not serving anyone, but really profit. I think we have to find that balance of where we are able to add density to a way that's appropriate to a neighborhood while also achieving reasonable affordability, but without also like making us feel like we're in a completely different neighborhood at the same time. And that's a tough balance. There's a tough, delicate balance. I think we're doing it in Morningside Heights. I think we're doing it there. There's a plan that's very popular. I ran on this plan, and it's a plan that helped me get elected. They add density near transportation hubs, near near main avenues, and I think this is something that is reasonable, which is also helping. It's a good plan that I think should serve as a model for the city. Mark was the supporter of it. I'm taking it on as the applicant.
Aisha.
Thank you. Hello, Councilmember Abreu, Sean. So it's encouraging to hear your statements about the fight for affordable housing. Housing is a human right. And thank you for raising the point about the amount of homeless that we deal with in our city. I think these importance are obviously very important. And in considering increasing density, in considering going against the traditional contextual experience that we have here in our community, my wonder is what of the conversations that came up when we were fighting the inward rezoning, when we were pushing back against what those plans were, what about the infrastructure in the CB12 community district? Is it, do we have the same concerns that we had when we were talking about Inwood specifically? And where are those things in the conversation? Where are the supports for the increase, the possible influx of people as we increase more housing, more units? Where are those supports going to come from? Have we addressed the issues with the existing infrastructure for the people who are here now as it is before we talk about expanding to include more people without such plans?
Yeah, what do you mean by, I appreciate your question, Aisha. What do you mean by preserving, you mean like helping with repairs of that current infrastructure?
So when I speak, I mean everything from the environmental impact through the impact on increasing ridership on the subway line. The fact that in recent years we've seen extensive flooding when weather is turbulent.
I understand your question now.
In our train stations, all schooling for children, when more children are living in the district, when you increase that. And what is the existing state of schooling as it is in the district? And then you add more families and children.
Yep.
Where
no,
all
I hear you
in the conversation.
And if I could just piggyback on Aisha's question, because there's the more traditional question of infrastructure, electrical, gas, water and sewer. And, you know, there's push for electrification. And I think we pointed out or asked about a year ago, what is the plan for the city to work with Con Ed to increase the capacity of the grid? Because the grid in Washington Heights and Inwood is out of date as it is. And if you would take buildings off of, you know, gas or oil and put it on electrical, we don't have that capacity. So who is looking at that basic infrastructure that's needed?
That is a great question, Wayne. And with respect to Con Ed, I'll start with that. You know, perhaps I need more information on what the state of the grid is at the moment and how we can expand capacity. Perhaps that could be Amber is on here, my chief of staff. Perhaps that could be a hearing we could do. I'm the chair on state and federal. Perhaps that's the hearing we could do with consumer affairs to really shed light on the problem. I think that's a great issue. Amber, please take that down.
Yeah.
We would like to explore that. With respect to the exhausting infrastructure, I mean, we see what happens on 157 every time that there's a flood, right? We see what's happening with our subway systems, what's happening with the sewer system that was not constructed to withstand the severe rainfall, right? And regardless of the addition of more people or even the state now, right, we have to address that problem. We have allocated a lot of funding to our schools. Most of our capital dollars goes towards schools, you know, going to our auditoriums, whether it's for our gyms, right? At PS4, for instance, we're bringing a new auditorium, we're bringing a new gym on 160th Street. We are everything within the council's power. We're going to do the alcoves from 158 to 165. Those sidewalks have been in disrepair for so long. They just started the repairs today. The sidewalks are finally being done by the alcoves on the upper end from 158 to 165, right? So when I came in, I called DOT and I said, this must be something we work on now. When it came to schools, I work with the SCA to make sure that our schools are up to par right now, the infrastructure. 125th, maybe out of CB12's district, but it's important. There's a pool there that did not have the resources needed to come back for our kids to use it for the entire community. I allocated $2.5 million this past year. We need another $7.5 million to get there at a minimum to see a renovation there. So when it comes to infrastructure, something that we're taking on and we're fighting hard. But you're right, Aisha. we have to take into account the exhaustion of our infrastructure, particularly as people increase, as the population in our neighborhood increases. And that's even without new development. Folks are living in roommate situations, unlike we've seen before, right? I live in right now with a roommate myself in Manhattan Valley, right? And it's not even a building it's a building that's been constructed many years ago. So as the roommate relationships occur over time, because rent is coming so expensive, folks are living in a roommate scenario, that's already putting a huge dent on our infrastructure, but we have to account for it.
Yeah, and just for reference, Steve Simon, who's on the Land Use Committee, also chairs our Health and Environment. And years ago, Health and Environment looked at and fought hard with a gas-related project that I'm sure he can give you more information on. But perhaps Health and Environment has or continues to look at the adequacy of the gas and electrical infrastructure for the community. I will tell you that when my building, which was built 110 years ago, when we converted to gas because Bloomberg and others were pushing us, off of oil, we had to pay $250,000 to get Con Ed to upgrade the service in the street, which pissed my attorney off because from her perspective, it is Con Ed's responsibility to maintain the service. But we had to pay them $250,000, and that was the discounted price because we agreed to be on interruptible service. If we didn't want to be an interruptible service, it would have been closer to $500,000 for them to increase the service in the public street. So that just is an example of how the service that we have is inadequate for the existing buildings.
Yeah, Wayne, you're absolutely right. And I think there needs to be a lot more attention on this. We have a lot of buildings in our district that, because of a shutoff done by Con Ed, now the building is without gas because of mistakes made by Con Ed, and now Con Ed is not stepping in to address that. We had that in a fair share of buildings in our neighborhood, whether it's increasing capacity or making sure that the resources are available to bring gas back into our neighborhoods is a priority. But yes, it does speak to the aging infrastructure and its inability to really withstand the pressure being applied to it.
Yeah, I lived through that gas shutoff, and our building made the papers years ago. We all discovered the George Foreman grill. James Bosley.
That's unfortunate. I'm sorry about that. That's terrible.
Hi, I was going to speak about this. It's actually old business, but the Artemis development project at Trinity Church site on the notorious Siemens and Cumming intersection. They've reapplied for their variance to build a very large structure there that is market rate, not affordable. But I see several people from the neighborhood have also chimed in on the Q&A. So should I wait on that? Because it's not really in Council Member Abreu's district.
Yeah, Wayne, I'm gonna have to step out in a second.
Yeah, as I was saying, the Cummings development is not on tonight's is not on tonight's agenda. However, we can discuss any comments as old or new business. So before the councilman leaves, James, do you have anything for him concerning?
No, that was my only.
Wayne?
Yes.
Wayne? Yeah, because I know Councilman Abreu has to go. I wanted to, there's someone named Kate London who had a question, and I'm sorry, Laura. Laura had a question, who's an attendee, and I was wondering if she can quickly be able to ask her question, because we're here for the community, so just making sure that she can get her question in before the council member has to go, because I know he has a busy schedule. So,
Laura.
Ayala.
Yeah, I think I've just Laura, I think you can talk now.
Yeah, you can hear me now, right? Yes, Councilman Abreu, what my question has to do with creating more affordable housing in anyone's district. We have I'm sure this is happening in your district as well, landlords are hoarding apartments in anticipation of these large buildings being approved. So what you said about rents not going up in the surrounding neighborhoods, I don't think that's really true. We have landlords harassing neighbors, keeping apartments empty, not doing repairs because they're smacking their lips at the prospect of being able to develop on these sites. So I think I think I see Caitlin London also asked this question, what can the council do about landlords who are hoarding apartments and harassing tenants to instead of outright evicting them? In effect, they're evicting them.
Yeah, so warehousing is, we just saw an article yesterday scathing that at least 90,000 apartments are really just vacant by the landlord. I think in the same way we punish small businesses, or not that. In the same way we punish landlords, commercial landlords for having vacancies, which we aren't doing right away. We aren't doing right now, but we should be doing. We should be doing the same thing for landlords that are keeping their apartments vacant, and we know why they're doing it. Because it reduces the availability of housing and therefore they can jack up the rents. Look, I'm not denying one's reality. I'm not saying it's universally true that it doesn't increase someone's rent, but studies show that generally speaking, that's the case, that it doesn't increase surrounding neighborhood. However, I'm not going to deny one's truth. I don't deny that it's happening in our neighborhoods. I'm sure it is.
And don't you think that should be addressed before we talk about the lack of affordable housing, when there's housing right there already in existence, before we let
I think we should
greedy
do both.
landlords overdevelop?
I think we should do both.
But I think that before we allow variances, we should make sure that we're dealing with buildings that already exist and people who are already housed. And so, that I think it would be disingenuous to claim what a hardship, how much we need to increase density until we already use what we have on hand.
Yeah, but
I think we should do both. And we've seen the population change in the past 10 years by a lot in New York City. So we should continue to expand capacity as much as we can, is my opinion.
Steve?
Yeah, I just want to note that the warehousing of vacant apartments, in my mind, is a real scandal. It's a real shame. And I when I worked for Councilmember Michaels, we spent years trying to pass legislation to make it illegal. But unfortunately, the courts have held that the landlords have the right to do basically whatever they want with their properties, rent, and decide whether or not to rent them. But I would like to see the public advocate and the city council, let them.
There's a press conference tomorrow on this, Steve, that I'm going to be there. I'm going to be present. And they're proposing a plan, so we'll see what it is. Yeah, but I'd like to see us publicly shame the landlords who are refusing to rent apartments. As the public advocate does a worst landlords list, let's do a worst landlords list of people who won't rent vacant apartments. It's there's got to be some way in which we can attack this problem. Yeah, that's a great idea, Steve. I think that by highlighting those bad actors, I think it increases pressure and shame, and hopefully it changes that behavior. And I think we should put the real estate groups on, put them in, put them at risk somehow, or to tell them, what are you doing? You're supposed to be in the business of renting apartments. Why aren't you telling your members they should be renting their vacant apartments? Why are you letting this happen? Yeah, I agree with you, Steve. All right, well, all right, I'll leave it in your hands. So you can run with it. Take it. Thank you. All right, bye. I'm submitting an LS on that today. Okay, very good. Okay, bye. Thank you.
All right, Aisha, is that an Old Hand, New Hand?
New Hand. I just wanted to follow up with what Steve Simon just said in regards to holding landlords accountable where warehousing is concerned. I definitely see a lot of it happening in the district, and more than just shaming and placing expectations that people are going to be noble. We're in the business of creating resolutions, and you're in the business of legislation, correct? And I feel like in the arena of housing, the same way in the nonprofit world, you have what would be considered unrelated business income when you're doing something that has nothing to do with what your mission is, right? I would assume that a landlord's mission when they have apartments is to provide housing. So why would they be empty for years upon years upon years? That should be considered unrelated business income, especially when they do get benefits from them, when they get maybe tax dollars, when they file losses or whatever it is. If it can be substantiated that people are actually applying for these apartments, which I have seen in many cases, they should not be able to reap benefits.
I agree. That's a great idea as well, Aisha. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay. So
I think I think we got a lot of great ideas. Actually, I have a little notepad running, so I really appreciate you guys having us. I do have to get Councilmember Abreu to his 8 o'clock on time, but we would be happy to come back. There's nothing we like talking about more than housing. So definitely continue to include us, and we'll be following up with you as well.
yeah, so in the interim, should we continue to keep you in the loop, Amber?
Yes, please do. Please do.
Okay, and it's 7:59, so you can get to your 8 o'clock meeting on time if it's via Zoom.
I appreciate you all.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us.
Bye-bye.
Quick question for my land use committee members. How many of you had the opportunity to review the intro session PowerPoint that I shared on the City of Yes zoning text amendment?
I read 2/3 of it.
And what are your impressions or your thoughts based on what you've read?
I thought much of it sounded reasonable. And I wasn't really aware that projects with less than 200 apartments required environmental impact statements. As far as I knew, they didn't. And if you had to do an EIS, you could probably avoid it by just doing an environmental assessment. So I don't know. I don't know how onerous it was, if there was such a requirement in the first place.
Yeah, I'm interested in hearing what others, have to say, but I didn't go through the recording, which I think is the whole 2-hour meeting. I did go through the presentation and felt that the concepts sounded good, but the examples of the rationale given seemed a little anecdotal. It wasn't clear to me the extent to which the problem or problems that, the text amendment is seeking to resolve were clearly articulated. And if there are not already means, as Steve just gave an example of, means to deal with them. So is it just a way to, going back to the conversation we were just having, loosen regulations and allow development to happen with less oversight and therefore less control over what eventually happens, particularly if you're looking at trying to advance certain public sector goals, be it affordable housing in particular, or other community facility needs. So that was my gut reaction.
Yeah, let me just make one other point. The effort to make it easier for people to put to have solar panels on rooftops struck me as being somewhat in line with a resolution that we passed some time ago. That seemed like something that we would want to embrace.
Right, but as I said, in theory it sounds good, and we want to embrace it. And we passed a resolution. The example that was given as a problem is, I think currently you can't put the solar panels within either 6 or 12 feet of the parapet wall.
And it can't take up more than 25% of the roof.
Right, so the two different things.
Yeah.
So my question is, why is the former a problem to be solved? And I say that because my building right now is going through the local law 11 work. We have solar panels on our roof, as Vivian can tell you. We had to remove maybe half of them because when you're putting the drop scaffolding, there's rigging that goes on the roof, and the solar panels are really delicate. And if they're too close to the parapet wall, they're in the way, which they were in the case of my building. So they had to be removed. So maybe it makes sense, since every building that's 5 stories or more has to go through this local law 11 work every 5 years, not to have solar panels so close to the parapet wall that they need to be removed when you have to do hang scaffolding. So that was my point. You know, a lot of the examples were given, but how well thought out are the solutions?
Yeah, I felt that, you know, they gave the example of what should be done with rezoning some of these issues. But I want to know why the original issue wasn't placed in the first place. You know, why can't a guy have a music studio on the ground floor? I mean, what is the reason behind that? The original zoning and the original zoning of why not have solar panels on the roof that are so many feet away? I mean, I wish they would have explained, you know, the original. It sounded like the whole thing was a sales pitch, and I wish that they had given more facts about the original zoning and why they felt it needed to be changed, rather than just upgrading everything. I wanted to know what dangers, perhaps, people back then might have seen for creating these regulations.
I had similar thoughts when they were talking about the C1, C2, C3, C4. It's like, well, what was the reason originally that you can do certain types of businesses in some areas and not in others? What's the problem? And in wiping all of that away, do you see any negative impacts? I mean, it struck me that we hear from people all the time when it comes to licensing, the noise that's generated by places that are just supposed to be restaurants that turn into clubs. And here it seems to be they're encouraging, you know, dancing wherever. Will that just create in neighborhoods like Washington Heights and Inwood more noise impacts? I mean, so what's the rationale behind pushing for dancing in the streets with the Motown sound?
Yeah, I in general, I thought, yeah, this is all sounds great, but I want to know, what are we sacrificing to do this? What were the original fears that put in these regulations? So I wouldn't want to be in favor of something that I'm not educated to know, you know, what the dangers involved in removing some of these regulations are.
Tanya?
Yeah, impressions on my end. Sometimes things are proposed. The real goal is hidden, and it's like it's smoke and mirrors, little, you know, bones thrown for the real purpose of a plan, right? In my opinion, the real purpose of the plan is really about business, and it's less about the housing end. I don't see how one is supporting the other. I don't see I don't see a real plan, is what I'm saying. And so in terms of the housing, it's to me it's a little bit murky, like as James was just saying. And I just wonder, if people say yes to this, that part component of this will just be an afterthought, because the real purpose is actually to support bringing more businesses in, or creating more leeway for business, which I know that's not us, but I'm not saying I don't support easing unnecessary restrictions on businesses, but not to the detriment of making of something of creating chains, you know, allowing chains, a bunch of chain establishments, and allowing people to skirt the reasonable requirements, things like that. So it's just my thought. I'm just a little bit cynical. I just don't. I wonder what the real purpose is. And so, you know, and I think throwing a bone will, you know, and say, oh, we're going to do this with affordable housing. And then people sort of, you know, say, okay, let's go. And then once these things are approved, and then we see that that part is just neglected. Just my opinion.
Yeah, and I see Jim Berlin's hand regarding the affordable housing. I was somewhat struck by the example of renovating the building, and I think going to one of the points I made with the councilman, there seemed to be a push to reduce the minimum size acceptable, you know, for a residential unit. And, you know, they gave the example that, well, the studios would be 450 square feet. And all of the other apartments in the building would have to be these massive, which was the term used, 13 and 1400 square foot apartments. And if you look at the older apartment buildings in our community, there are a number of apartments that were 13 or 14. They weren't considered massive. They were considered like family size, like 3-bedroom apartments or something. But there again, it's like how accurate was, you know, the analysis that if you're renovating an existing building, you would be forced into having, you know, oversized apartments because of that. It's like the real story like wasn't being told, at least from my perspective. Jim Berlin.
The other guy is James. Of course, I'm James also. I want to actually second both what James was talking about, and I believe it was what Tanya was talking about. My concern is that, as sort of James alluded to, when this original zoning and stuff was put in place, it wasn't like they were crazy people saying, let's make up nutty rules for no reason at all. They probably had real rationales for what they did. And insofar as these rationales are, you know, obsolete, let's say, for example, you know, they didn't have a certain kind of fireproofing then, but now we do. That's one story. But on the other hand, insofar as there is validity to these rationales and nothing has changed, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So that's one piece. The other piece is we and we have new members every now and then. So one of the major brilliant things in my view that our committee did, and I didn't do it, by the way, it was initiated by someone named O.C. Cameron, who's still on the board. It dawned on her that if you look at Inwood or Washington Heights or whole sections of the Lower East Side, you've got acres and acres, square miles of buildings, all at the same height. None of them cast shadows on one another. So to some degree, of course, you have to leave them with the parapets and such. All of these are wonderful candidates for solar panels, and presumably solar panels can be designed in a way that they're not all that heavy. I mean, obviously they can't be so flimsy they blow away. Now, the problem, and this is why we passed the resolution, is let's say you put in these solar panels and then someone, because they have a right, you know, in an R8 zone to build this tall monstrosity, suddenly blocks your solar panels. So and there may be similar things in other parts of the country. Basically, what we said is the sun that now reaches the roof of the building is theirs, and you cannot block it. And we, of course, we're not the city council or the state legislature, but this is a kind of zoning that we urged city planning to look at. Now, we have no evidence that they did, but I think it goes hand in hand with what they're talking about here. You know, it doesn't make sense to make solar panels easier to install if, you know, 5 years later, they're not going to work anymore. So I think, you know, both of the two issues that were brought up are very significant. And one other thing, if you don't mind, I somehow didn't get a chance to look at this earlier, so I was glancing at the presentation now. And the thing that troubles me, and this isn't, you know, neither here nor there maybe, but it's almost slick. So it may be, you know, they're trying to make something look real good, and if you burrow down a little bit more deeply, you'll see, oh, look, this wonderful safety thing we used to have isn't there anymore, you know, for the sake of whatever. So I agree, we have to look. Now, one thing we could do, depending on the timing, is we could ask, for a personal presentation to our committee, and we could ask questions if there's time. But I too am dubious in some ways. So, and it's good to see that in some way we're all on the same wavelength. This is all very nice, but thank you.
Yeah, and we do have a couple representatives of city planning with us, although they're not here this evening to talk about the City of Yes text amendment, but we certainly will invite them to attend a meeting and talk about what the timing is on this, as well as they're hearing what's the intent, what is actually the problem or problems that the text amendment is seeking to resolve, and how in fact does it resolve those problems. I saw Steve's hand for a second, but then it disappeared.
Well, you had mentioned, I mean, we haven't actually seen the text amendments. So I assume at some point in the future, they will be referred to the community boards for review, and we will be getting a full presentation on them. I mean, I am curious to know if the city planning representatives can at least give us a time frame as to when we would expect that to happen. But I mean, it's at this point, all we've seen is the
info session.
Is that info session, yeah. So I mean, it's as they say, the devil is in the details, and it would be good to actually see the wording of the text amendments.
Olivia, Jose, can you address the timing?
Hey, how are you? Can you guys hear me?
Sure.
I was actually trying to send in the chat the links for the contact information for each of the zoning text amendments. If you have particular questions, there are specific DLs for them to.
Yeah, it's probably better if you were to email the links to the office, and that could then get distributed, because it works better than putting it in chat.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, that makes sense. In terms of timing, we are still working on this. I believe there's gonna be at least one more info session. I believe that timing for starting to draft the text will be sometime around next year. So I'm guessing that's when the community board will be seeing the text amendment. So, but at the moment, at the beginning, right now, we're collecting a lot of information. So I believe that the roadshow is still going on. I know part of the team that's working on that text amendment particularly. But if we can find out a little more of the details on that.
Yeah.
I believe we do have that information already.
But I mean, you're collecting info from who? It sounds like this is someone's initiative. They have something they want to achieve, and these info sessions seem like a way of selling it. But what is it they want?
Well, we're collecting information from anyone, because the DL is open to anyone. The email, anybody can email the DL, and we are selecting questions. People are asking for briefings. People are asking, or are giving proposals and ideas for what we should be doing. In terms of, the whole idea of City of Jazz is essentially thinking more creatively, and how to ensure that we are able to address the issues that are happening in our city in general, with housing, with the zero carbon neutrality and the economic opportunities. There's some things that I definitely understand. I believe it was Steve who was mentioning, trying to get at the background of why are we particularly addressing different issues in the Southern Resolution. I think that's a great point. We sometimes don't explain the history behind it. It was the same thing when we were working on the physical cultural establishments text amendment last year, that essentially everybody could have agreed that the prohibition of that wasn't something that makes sense at the time being. So we're revisiting that. So it's a lot of the context and the history in the past. But I will definitely flag that for the team to ensure that they can respond to why wasn't this allowed before, or why should be allowed now. I think that's definitely a good reference.
Yeah, and the point you just made is in fact a good one. We've dealt with a couple of, I think it's either BSA or special permits for, gyms, Planet Fitness. And, the question is, well, why is this required? And that, physical cultural establishment going back to the good old days of, Times Square, and it was trying to control, pornography and that whole industry. And it's something that is an out of date requirement. So, I mean, we've had several conversations. We kind of understood where it was coming from.
Right.
And as I said, as we look at, some of these discussions, the question is, where are they coming from?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And these are particular things that, usually happen. We couldn't tell you. I mean, I had asked about it. It's like, that makes absolutely no sense to require, you can have a bike shop, but you cannot have a bike shop repair in the same place, things like that don't make sense. I think it's interesting to know where we're getting at it. And I'm definitely going to flag it. Maybe, I don't want to speak for the team on behalf of the team, but maybe they were trying to, ensure that all of the good things are up front, all the things that we're reversing, but it's a important thing to look at the history behind it. So thank you for that. I will let them know. Hopefully they can amend the next info session, or maybe they're already planning to do it that way. Like I told you, I haven't worked with them. Maybe later, the next one is going to be like, this is why we're fixing everything that we did wrong in a couple of years ago. But yeah, next year, 2023 should be the time when we're going to be referring the applications. And again, there are 3, text amendments. I'm not sure if the 3 of them are going to, roll out simultaneously like we did before, but we'll see.
Yeah, and to Steve Simon's point, my assumption is yes, the community boards will have the text amendments formally presented to them, but my concern from last year, the year before, is we had, I guess this was coming towards the end of de Blasio administration, we had like 3 text amendments coming almost one behind the other with very short timeframes. And so this, to me, was an opportunity to be a bit more proactive and get the committee looking at the, information that is being shared, publicly, so that we can start brainstorming about, okay, what makes sense to us, what doesn't make sense, what are our questions, and hopefully have that input influence, what it happens. Far too often when we get something, it's a fait accompli, and it's like, well, that was a great idea, and if we got it 3 months ago, we could have done something with it. Trying to avoid that.
Yeah, I hear you. But I mean, I think that the efforts that are being made for that, hopefully I'll work with Olivia to trying to get the information from the team. And this is particularly to all the text amendments, right? Not just the housing opportunity. This is for all 3.
Yeah, it's all of the city of yes. So I mean, as I pointed out, the issue of what's allowed vis-a-vis certain businesses and certain commercial districts is interesting. And as you may recall, the community board did pass a resolution once again saying that the C8 districts, which only allow automotive uses, don't make sense in our community where they're mapped, and we wanted those changed.
Mm-hmm.
And that hasn't happened. So it's interesting that you're looking at it now, but we said 10 years ago that if they're mapped in places where they're mapped over residential buildings,
Right.
ground floor retail. Why would you do that? Why would you want to encourage automotive uses as opposed to allowing the existing residential, or encouraging more residential? So we have that, but we're talking about carbon neutrality. But going back to the comments with Councilman Abreu, who's looking at the capacity of the infrastructure? And everyone wants to say they're progressive and they're pushing buildings to electrify. Can Con Ed provide us with the electricity that's needed, or are we going to have to individually pay out of pocket? And in my building, it's 100% shareholder owned, so we know the cost of everything because we pay the cost of everything. Who is working with Con Ed and National Grid and Weber to tremendously increase the capacity as opposed to just making policy statements. In terms of, where things can be located. We're seeing almost every week there's a fire related to the lithium batteries. And yes, we want to be able to store energy, but what are the safety requirements that are needed? Where should batteries, like, for solar storage be placed? Is there a reason for some of the regulations on where they can be located and how they should be located on roofs or in buildings? And do we want to just wipe away those regulations, or do we need to understand, why they are there, and maybe some of them need to stay so that we don't have accidents? Jim, Berlin.
I wanted to amplify two of your statements because I think, occasionally Con Ed, who's, as you pointed out, job is presumably to sell gas as long as they can do that, they sort of make it difficult. The same sort of thing happened in the area I live in along Cabrini Boulevard and along Fort Washington Avenue, and where Con Ed, except there were more buildings involved, they wanted $2.5 million to run the gas pipes. And we just balked long enough and they eventually ran the gas pipes. But so that's one issue. And since you mentioned the batteries, because we have interesting electrical things where I live in a good sense, but as I believe these large scale lithium battery things, at the moment, they are absolutely forbidden inside of buildings. They have to be outside, precisely because if they unfortunately catch fire, the fires are very, very difficult to put out. I believe there's some crazy statistics where a Tesla caught fire and they needed like 45,000 gallons of water to finally put out the fire. It just because the second you stop with the water, it comes back again. So these things have great potential because obviously the sun doesn't shine at night, but we need the electricity. But again, at the moment, the other thing is that they're working on different electrolytes. They're not as flammable, so that might help too. But these are very, and I think that's inherent in the sort of conservatism in a good sense I'm hearing from the committee, that insofar as there are protective regulations that also appear to be a pain in the butt to a developer or whatever, we have to look real hard as to why they're there, because we don't want someone to go, oops, and suddenly, half a building burns down because, oh, well, we thought that was too cumbersome, Thank you.
Do we have other comments from the committee? If not, I see 3 attendee hands, and I'm just going to go in order from top to bottom. So, Kate?
Hi, thank you for calling on me. I wanted to speak, I believe you wanted in the old business part, I wanted to speak about the Artemis development on the former Holy Trinity site.
Okay, so let me ask a question. Is there anything from the board or attendees on the City of Yes? If not, we can move to old and new business. I'm not hearing. So, Kate, let's go into old business and new business, however we like to, categorize that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all the committee members. We know you work hard to protect our community, and it's much appreciated. And thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight. As I said, I wanted to address the development at 22 through 38 Cummings Street that's being proposed by Artemis. And I wanted to urge you as a body to do everything in your power to prevent them receiving a zoning variance. They're now claiming for the 3rd time that they need multiple variances to our very hard-won new zoning laws, and they're claiming this is due to hardship. However, there is no hardship. The BSA established that at the last meeting, and they have every right to develop the site within the current zoning regulations. We have zoning regulations for a reason. some of the things have been spoken about already tonight, the contextual integrity of the community and infrastructure, all of those things. They're basically attempting to rezone our neighborhood with this variance request, and there's really no need for it. They can perfectly profitably build as of right. So I'm urging you to send a resolution to the BSA recommending no variance for Artemis.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
I earlier today, actually, I got an email from the district manager. Someone else had a concern about the Cummings Street project. And I asked him to reach out to BSA because my understanding is on October 25th, the development team resubmitted at BSA's request. I mean, BSA raised a bunch of questions and I had them to resubmit by the 25th. So I wanted BSA to give us, some information on, what their questions were, what the responses are. If there is documentation, they can share. We don't have any of that at this juncture, but I have asked our district manager to get that for the committee.
Thank you very much. And it's also our understanding that BSA recommended that Artemis reach out to the community for feedback on the plan. And to my knowledge, that hasn't been done.
Well, I mean, as I said, they resubmitted to BSA last week. So, I mean, typically your BSA will request the applicant, but my point is they typically do that when BSA has provided them with some level of feedback, which is why I want to know, what did BSA ask them to do? What was the response? What materials can they share with us so that when we are, sitting down with them, we're better informed.
Thank you very much.
Dan.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Dan Bauk. I'm calling in here on the same business that was just raised about the Artemis development, and I heard what you all just said. My understanding is that the BSA will be hearing this in a couple of weeks, and so I hope that there will be time for this body to be able to look at this material and be able to register some of its whatever it's thinking about this. That I think the only point I'll raise, because my colleagues are doing my neighbors are doing such a good job of talking about this, is that as we were looking at and thinking about and fighting about the Inwood rezoning, and as we're thinking about a city of yes, as we're thinking about affordable housing, I want to say yes to housing. We need housing, but I want to trust that my city is going to watch out for us and is actually going to enforce the rules that it makes. And so when we make these zoning rules, when we sit down and say what developers have to do, I want to have faith that the city's then going to watch our back and is going to stand up to the rules that it set. We set these zoning rules, and I really hope that we can be firm in holding these zoning rules and holding them pretty fast. This does not in any way look like it's not going to provide affordable housing, and it's certainly not a reason to disrupt the integrity of this rezoning. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it time?
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. It's Tina, but you have
okay.
Danish. and there are going to be some repetitions. I apologize because my neighbors are awesome and saying the things that I intended to say. So basically, I can tell you what the BSA told the developer on July 19th. The chair, and I'm quoting, said that they have not substantiated either that there is physical hardship or that are associated with the site itself, or that a building within the current zoning would not be financially feasible. She also told them, do not come back with the same project, and ask them to please reach out to community representatives and find out how to address their concerns for the community. I have checked with all the community representatives, official community representatives such as electeds and you, and none of the above have heard from Artemis. And the last date for the new submission was October 25th. It would seem to me that you would reach out before you created a new submission. So that in itself, I think, actually disqualifies them from future accommodation from BSA.
Yeah, well, I don't think it does disqualify them because there's an application process that is governed by, you know, the charter and regs. But the point is, BSA asked them to do something, which is why I said earlier, I asked our district manager to reach out to BSA and get directly from them information on what they requested, what the response was, to share that with us so that when, you know, we are meeting with them, we are well informed.
I hear what you're saying. I appreciate that. And I think that the BSA, because I was on that call from like early in the morning, I think the BSA strongly assumed and recommended that the Artemis reach out to you and discuss these concerns with you. And so I think there's double disappointment.
Right. So if, once again, if BSA says to the district manager or shares a document with us that says that, you know, it was recommended in July that they reach out to you, and it's now, I was going to say September, I'm losing it, it's now November, and that hasn't happened, then, you know, that would be one of the things that, you know, we know factually and will, you know, take into consideration as we're considering whatever comes before us.
Right. So I hear you again, and thank you. I want to just also speak briefly to the issue of affordable housing because it came up earlier tonight, and I think it is the one of the most pressing issues for our city. This building is 100% market rate. A studio of about 436 square feet costs almost $2,400. That ain't affordable for our neighborhood, pardon my French, okay? If you look at the CB12's median income, it's about $55,000, and 46% of our households make under $50,000. Our household average size is 2.8. That comes out to an affordable apartment being a 2-bedroom for $1,375. So we are not talking about affordable housing. This will not alleviate the housing crisis. I think that they have every right in the world to build this building. It was a transparent bidding process. They knew what they were buying. Let them build the building within the zoning resolution. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all of you.
Thank you. We're back to Laura.
Hi, you know, so much of what I would say would be repetitive, but what I do want to do is I want to tie this back to two things that were spoken about earlier. I want to tie this building where the Trinity Church used to be. There's a lot of cynicism on the part of this developer. I think he came to our neighborhood with no respect for us, for our elected officials, or for you. I think they had a lot of disdain for you. They have shown that they were willing to lie about parking. They were willing to lie about, oh, there's rock under there. And I think that we have no reason to assume that they want anything other than make the maximum profit with the minimal expenditure. I'm worried about the City of Yes connection to this issue. I'm worried that suddenly they're talking about, oh, we have to avoid, you know, we have to make it easier for developers not to provide parking. I think it's really funny that the current Commissioner of Transportation was the same guy who brought uber congestion to this neighborhood through allowing fake valet parking, allowing parking on parkland near La Marina, hiring dozens and dozens of crossing guards to permit all of these cars to come here. He created a place to drink and drive. So when we talked earlier, I think it was one of the gyms talked earlier about we have to look at what happens when we bend rules. One of the rules that was bent in our neighborhood was the 500-foot rule, and we ended up with a neighborhood that is the place to drink and drive. We don't want any more variances that end up further in damaging this neighborhood, and the variances that they're seeking definitely would. Our quality of life, the infrastructure. I want to point out, when earlier when we were talking about, and I'll finish this up, when we're talking about whether this zoning we fought against it or for it, the neighborhood had worked very, very hard on a rezoning plan. It was totally ignored. And the one that Idanis was tried to push through was fought against because it involved a lot more development than we're allowing now. So yeah, we fought hard to come up with a compromise. We shouldn't let one developer's greed undercut all of the work we did to come up with a valid compromise. They should build as of right.
Yeah, well, actually, Community Board 12 and the Land Use Committee are extremely familiar with the inward rezoning process, and we're also extremely familiar with the multitude of plans and perspectives that were active and in some cases opposing at the time. And the resolution that we finally passed, all 12 pages of it, some of the community folk who swore that the Land Use Committee was in the pockets of whomever, I don't know who it was, suddenly said, well, gee, you've took into account all of these varying, opinions. And, while we didn't get everything that we put in our plan, it's pretty balanced. So, as I said, we're very familiar with the inward rezoning, and we're very familiar that, there were, lots of issues and agendas. And I would say it really is more EDC, which was in the lead for this as opposed to city planning, but it was more the direction it wanted to go that moved things as opposed to what even the councilman wanted, because as I pointed out, the original proposal did not cover the area that eventually was rezoned. It was only from 10th Avenue going east to the Harlem River. And it was through, comments from, this party, that party, something got bigger and bigger, and bigger. And, what's interesting, like last month when Vivian and Tanya reported on, their involvement in the ULI's, urban design workshop, you do in fact end up with lots of competing interests, but in this case, the inward rezoning grew because of that, and some of that growth might be good because, quite frankly, the large area of I think the contextually zoned section would not have happened otherwise. But as our councilman said, from the city council's perspective and probably from the mayor's office perspective, it can't be just one thing. And so if you're growing the area that you are preserving and, saying this is contextual, then they want to see, because, the city hall has certain objectives, where's growth going to occur? The community board pointed out that the size of some of the new buildings along the waterfront dwarf Dykeman houses, which are like 14-story buildings. And we thought that was way too big. So there's a lot going on there, but I just want to say that, it's not just community residents who are familiar with the inward rezoning. The community board lived that process for like 18 to 20 months with many, many meetings and culminating in a very, comprehensive resolution that was not for or against anything in a blanket manner. It really looked at a number of aspects. In some pieces we said that made sense. Some pieces we said it didn't make sense. And other areas we suggested how it might change. And although I heard from someone in, the city council's office, it was one of the most thoughtful resolutions they've seen on land use matters, not a lot of it was implemented, unfortunately.
So given all the work that you put into it, I'm hoping that you'll protect your hard work.
I think the committee does that on a routine basis.
Much appreciated, much appreciated.
You're quite welcome. Dave?
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So I won't say too much here because I've talked on this application before. It's the third round for it. I think that the main thing I just want to emphasize, there's a lot of previous points earlier about Cumming Street that have been made. The main thing is, and there was some discussion earlier tonight about, going to the BSA for things like the physical culture permits. And, that's BSA, in my experience with them, has typically been for that kind of thing. You go because there's a reason behind it. There's some technicality, or, your lot's a little irregularly shaped. And so, yeah, you nip a corner here, you tuck a use there. You had the hotel on 181st Street where, a tiny bit of property drifted over into the, the residential zone. So to permit the hotel use, they had to make a little adjustment. That's all very regular process. And you go and you explain your variance and you explain your justification, and that's fine. This was rejected the previous times because they were asking for an awful lot. And they really were, they knew about the rock when it was there, and just because it wasn't as profitable, didn't seem to justify what they're asking for, and so they were sent back to the drawing board. And what seems to have come back is still, they've trimmed down the request slightly, but still, it seems to be more than what would be in the realm of a justifiable variance. And this is why we're saying it's really more of a, you'd stand and look at a building that's 2 stories taller than the rest, and because of the geography, is more like a 10 or 11-story building when measured from the sidewalk. And you'd say, well, that doesn't seem to be contextual. And it's still looking, they haven't changed the height request at all. It's actually a little taller than it was last time. And they've reduced some of the parking variance. So now they're asking for, I think, 25% relief from the parking. There's maybe 12 fewer units, but it's very, very minor in terms of what they've changed. And, I think the bottom line to me is that it still doesn't justify changing the R7A zoning. And the fact that they have not, come back to the community as they were strongly recommended that they do. And it's November 2nd today, and they're going to be heard on the 15th. So this won't even have the opportunity to go before the full community board, which means at the end of the month. It seems that they're hoping that if they just keep going back to the BSA and slightly trim the request each time, or provide a little more data about rocks, that they'll be granted their variance. And I just don't think they've met that bar. So I would certainly, be writing comments myself to the BSA, and I would encourage the board or any other interested parties to say that this still does not justify the request, which is of a scale that really goes beyond what would be, considered typical of a variance. Thank you.
Well, two things, one, I'm very interested in saying what the district manager gets from, BSA on this. We had a meeting, meaning the land use committee, with BSA staff years ago, where we kind of clarified the process. So they should be able to provide us with the, the information and the documentation requested. But just for clarification, because I've seen, various comments about the purpose and the intent of BSA, and whether BSA is intended to handle sort of minor things. And my understanding from our conversations with city planning years ago, when we were doing one of these zoning training, is the Board of Standards and Appeals was created more or less at the same time that New York City's first zoning resolution was created, like in 1916. And it was to protect against any legal challenges that any zoning was a taking. So it provided a relief valve so that, there was a city agency that could consider modifications, which became known as, waivers of variance. I think they're variances, not waivers. And when the zoning was initially challenged, that BSA process, help to the city to, win the case that, the zoning that was put in place was not a taking. So it isn't intended to just do little things. I mean, it's intended to do a range of things, but what BSA, the board is supposed to do is to make sure that whatever waiver is granted is the minimum required in order to facilitate a reasonably, profitable development. So it's not supposed to be more than is needed, and it's not supposed to be so that can be tremendously profitable. And I forget the exact phrasing, but it's all written down, and there are 5 specific findings, as you know, Tom, that the projects are supposed to satisfy. But particularly for our new members, it's that the notion of zoning or certain city actions being a taking of of private property. That whole BSA process was put in place so that there is a legal argument saying that no, the zoning isn't a taking, because there's a mechanism that if you run into trouble, there's a means to get relief from whatever that issue is.
Yeah, I'm not disputing there's a mechanism or that there's 100 years of history going to the Supreme Court over the legality of zoning.
Yeah.
But I've read the criteria, I've read their arguments in the previous 2 cases, I've read it in this case, and I'm just sharing my thoughts as a community member that they have not in fact met those criteria. And if you look at the cap rate and the other things in their calculations, they have shown that their project is in fact profitable, a 4% cap rate on a number of the as of right scenarios, and they would like to make more money. So
no,
good on them to try, but I don't support what they're doing.
I understand that. I understand that. I believe someone at the BSA actually shared the same sentiment. The comments that I was sharing was not specific to this application. It was, just for information, particularly for my fellow committee members, because over the last couple of years, I've seen, comments pertaining to other BSA applications as well, where a sentiment, or sentiments were expressed that, well, BSA is only intended to do, sort of a narrow range of things. And I just wanted everyone to understand that, that legally, regulatorily is not the case. And it exists for a reason. And it's actually, dates back to the origination of zoning in New York City.
Understood. And as someone who also has 2 first names, if I know you would appreciate the point if you can refer to me as David and not Tom. Yep. I get that a lot.
And I have 3.
All right. Thank you so much.
Take care, Dave. Doris.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is totally on another subject, another matter. This week, I, as well as a number of other residents of the general area of the academy, attended a meeting, and it has to do with, quote, the wall that was proposed a year ago, October 2021. And the original proposal had a bronze solid wall as a background to cover the apartments adjacent to the terrace. And that would mean that my apartment, as well as many other apartments, would be almost entombed. And all the light, forget the view, but all the light would be taken away. And it's very upsetting. So they said that they would rework it, and they invited us to come this week, 1 year after the previous meeting. And we were expecting, like maybe 3 variations of suggestions that might work. There was nothing, nada. And it's of concern to a lot of us as to what will happen. We want to make it work, but I wanted to alert the, all of you to this problem that exists and that continues to exist. And maybe Vivian can enlighten you. I have a hard time talking. My voice is shot.
Yeah, no, I mean, the community board is very familiar with the project. As you said, it was presented to us October of, last year, and I'm pretty certain I have a copy of the presentation on my computer and shared it with the committee a year ago. At last month's meeting, Vivian did bring up the matter, and it was, requested that I reach out to the academy to ask them for an update. And actually, I, went one beyond that. I reached out to the academy and to LPC separately to, ask for an update. And the contact at LPC emailed me yesterday to say that, they will, get back to me on the status of where LPC is with this. And, I got a couple of responses, one yesterday, one today from the academy, and they echo that they in fact met with a number of community residents, and the letter that Vivian shared with Steve, Simon, and I was also shared with me today. They pointed out they had that meeting. They plan on having another couple of meetings.
And what are they going to do at these meetings?
Well, I'm reporting what was told to me, that they expect to come back to the community board, but not before sometime in early 2023. So they are looking at whatever the design options are. They shared with me, although it was not news, that the solid, wall, which is not, entombing anything, but it's at the property line, which the land use committee mentioned, because some folks seem to have missed this a year ago. The land use committee said that we thought that would be problematic, and that it was, blocking light, and it wasn't the greatest of views. We suggested that a glazed wall would be better because it would allow light to go through, and they thought there might be privacy concerns. And we said, well, instead of assuming there'd be privacy concerns, why don't you have a meeting, with the residents and talk about the project and see, if there would be concerns if instead of having a solid wall, if it were, all glass. So, some of the sentiments, concerns that are being, shared with us now came up in our discussion a year ago. And I completely agree that the solid wall is, from a design perspective, a bad thing.
Thank you. Vivian, are you talking?
I want to get through the members of the attendees first, and we'll come back to my fellow committee members who were talking for the, better part of it, which is fine. I just see one more hand, and then I'll be back to, I see 1, 2, 3 committee members. So back to Kate.
I'm so sorry. I didn't put my hand down. I've already spoken. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. So James Bosley has had his hand up for a while. Back to you.
Going back to the project at the Trinity Church, Seaman Avenue, the Artemis application. Speaking as the new kid in the class, their proposal comes before the board BSA November 14th or 15th. I'm not clear the exact date. We will not be meeting before that. How then are we to voice our concerns about that to that board meeting, the BSA meeting?
Well,
there's no saying when we will get details from Artemis, if ever. So I'm just curious as how that works.
Well, yeah, there are a couple of approaches, and Jim Berlin can also chime in on this. The normal route is for committees to consider a matter pass a resolution, and then for the full board to act on it. But there are instances where, for timing purposes, that doesn't work. So the committee could consider it and send it to the executive committee, which meets before the general meeting, and the executive committee can, adopt the resolution on behalf of the board. And at the general meeting, then the full body would ratify what the executive committee did. In other instances, there is insufficient time even for that, in which case the chair of the board can, adopt the action, write the letter. So at this juncture, first of all, we need to make sure that we are on top of the office staff, the district manager, to make sure they reach out to BSA to get the information so we can, review it. And if in fact, because we passed a resolution on this, more than a year ago, so we're already on record what our thoughts are. If the resubmitted project does not address our concerns, it is simple enough for a letter, short resolution will be drafted with the chair saying, on X date, community board passed a resolution, opposing the BSA requests as stated for these reasons, and the new project as resubmitted, or the project as resubmitted, still doesn't address it, so we continue to oppose that. So those are the three ways it can go, and it may very well have to be the latter, because it's not clear. Being today is the 2nd and the 14th is 12 days away, when we're going to get anything from BSA. But once again, I have to impress upon our district manager and maybe our chair that it's critical that they contact BSA like tomorrow.
Thank you.
Steve.
I was going to suggest what you had just recommended, that we send a letter pending our previous resolution, indicating that it's our understanding that the application has not been significantly modified to satisfy the concerns that we raised in the resolution. We should send it to them again. And I would suggest we also ask the BSA not to take any action at this time until we've had a chance to review the revised submission. And especially in light of the fact that they apparently asked the applicant to come to the board, I think we have pretty strong grounds to suggest that they should not be acting at this next meeting on November the 14th or the 15th, that we should have an opportunity to actually see the revised application. With respect to the other issue concerning the American Academy of Arts and Letters, I wasn't clear on what, Wayne, you said you did have some contact with the American Academy of Arts and Letters in the last day or two. Did they in fact say that they would be coming to our committee with a revised proposal?
They said they would be coming back to the committee, but not, until sometime in 2023, because their plan was to have additional meetings, with the community residents.
Right.
Now we can ask for them to let us know when those meetings are occurring, so that if committee members, and I think last year I said I would be interested, because I like to get information on some things firsthand, because at times when it's conveyed, it's not, it's a little bit post office, but it sounds like their game plan is to continue to meet, and maybe with a broader group of community residents, and to deal with that first before they come back to the committee, so that when they come back to the committee, someone doesn't say, well, they didn't speak to us.
Could we also try to confirm, try to get answers for the questions that Vivian has raised about whether there'll be a full review by the commission itself?
Well, as I pointed out, Steve, I also reached out to LPC directly, but I mean, once again, I don't want to seem annoyed, but a number of us have been on land use for a decade, a dozen years, more than that. So when the stoops to the American Academy buildings were modified to add ramps, there was a public hearing. When the little glazed link was, I see your hand, Vivian, I'll get to you.
All right,
When the glazed link
Right.
was proposed between there was a public hearing. So this is a much bigger physical project. So why wouldn't there be one?
Well, I agree with you, but I don't see any harm in just confirming that with the LPC, so we can.
Which is the reason why.
So we can put this issue to rest.
Yeah, which is the reason why LPC was contacted directly.
All right, very good.
Vivian.
Wayne, I resent that you're saying that you hear it here and there. There's been a real out.
You
bits and pieces. Let me finish. Come on, Wayne.
Yeah, I just wanted to be clear on what you were saying. My point was, when information is shared with me, or in general, it's not necessarily the same as hearing it directly firsthand. So,
right. And you have two people here, Doris spoke and Mitch Mondello, who is going to experience the same kinds of issues as here. In fact, it's quite the opposite. They don't want to meet with a lot of us. They asked me if they could meet with the Riviera board 790, because there are also issues in terms of them closing off the terrace from the other side. And I said, we're going through a board change. And honestly, it's the people whose lives will be affected living on the southern side of 790 Riverside Drive who are the ones who should meet with you. So they're very firm that basically they're not going to change what they want to do. And they, for example, want to put a cover over this connector, and they don't even keep, and we spoke about this in the meeting, they don't even keep the street clean where they are. There's a sense, there was a lot of discussion from somebody who was with us the other day from 788, Michael Valenti, about why they won't even consider putting it through the building and not having it on the terrace. There's going to be, I mean, it is of concern that they don't really seem to feel like they need to deal with the community, and that there was this whole discussion about whether they have a right to impact the community, though we too are a historic district, and we have to chase them, quite honestly, in order to get them to talk about something that's really a serious community issue. And I feel like they should be asked to come back to discuss the impact of what they're doing, and not just sort of the mechanics of landmarks. But as I told you in writing, there was no discussion of an open committee meeting with landmarks. It was all kind of, we can go back to, landmarks and get what we want. We don't need to listen to you.
Yeah, once again, as I said, I was asked to and did reach out to them. I separately reached out to LPC and will share with the committee, the responses from each. As we discussed, last week, it makes sense to have them come back and, present to us, what they have done or considering or changing. And, that's what, we want to know. And it sounds like we're not there yet.
I also think that they should discuss they told us that out of 5 points of renovation, they're already in the middle of 2. And at what point, again, are they going to have a hearing, and why are they going ahead without having a public hearing with landmarks?
But once again, as I pointed out, I think there was an email exchange just between you, Steve, and I. It wasn't a committee thing. It is LPC that determines when a public hearing is required. So there is work that's done, at the staff level. And so if they're doing a 5-part project, there may be parts of the project that don't need to go to the commissioners. And if it doesn't need to go to the commissioner, there isn't a public hearing. But just reiterating for the record and everything that I said by email, I think we're all pretty clear that anything that impacts the exterior appearance of a designated building has to go to the commissioners. Even something as simple as the project we dealt with last month for the United Palace, where the existing poster displays were being modified to include, monitors, that had to go to a public hearing. So,
they're in the process of their HVAC.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. This is a back and forth, and I've been waiting about 10 minutes, and you called on me to speak.
Yeah,
so I would like a chance to speak.
Yes, and so, Jim, you're next, and I'm simply, reiterating to, Vivian, the extent of the project, which we all looked at, everything that's going to be so visible is obviously going to be subject to a public hearing, but it is LPC that, determines, when the public hearing is, not the community board. And certainly the applicant doesn't say to LPC, I want you to hold a public hearing now, which is why, once again, I reached out to LPC for them to tell us where they are in the process. Jim.
Thank you. I want to get back to what you asked me about a while ago. And I agree for the most part with your third alternative and also with Steve, but I want to put a slightly more legalistic view on it. We basically passed a resolution, I believe, opposed to this development for a variety of reasons. That is our current statement about the situation. And insofar as we don't make an additional statement, that remains our statement. Now, on the other hand, as Steve pointed out, it would serve a great purpose to remind the BSA or whomever that this was our statement. And insofar as nothing has changed, and since nobody came to us, as far as we know, nothing has changed, we remain in objection to all these various things. So, and the other advantage to this is it doesn't even involve even the special power of the chair to act on behalf of the board if necessary. This is simply reiterating to the proper authorities that, we made this statement, as far as we know, in terms of official communications from anyone, including the developer, nothing has changed, and therefore our view on the situation hasn't changed. So I think that I'm simultaneously agreeing with both you and Steve. And I think, what I've also done is sort of simplify the technicalities. We can just write this letter.
Yeah, I mean, you could send a letter that says, attached as a copy of the resolution we passed on whatever date. To our knowledge, nothing materially has changed to address our concerns, and our position stands.
Yes.
Steve?
I would just suggest that we double check what that resolution says and make sure that it's a coherent statement. I'm a little bit concerned about.
Well, it's a little late now to make sure it's a coherent statement.
I know, but I'm recalling that there were some last minute revisions made to that resolution, and you never know quite what gets mailed out. So I would suggest that we take a look at it, and if it isn't coherent, we can at least still send a letter just reiterating that we were opposed to the project, and that is still our position.
Not a problem, makes sense. I will ask, I will check to see if I have it in my email, but it's probably easier for me just to ask the board to send us a copy of what went out so we can see what it says and make sure it's coherent. I see it is 9:12. I see one more hand. And this is from Mitch.
Yes. Hello, Wayne. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes.
Hi. So just two things getting back to the academy. I live at 780 Riverside Drive. I've been here in the building for 32 years. I lived in my current apartment, which is on the 6th floor, for 20 years. And the only view that I have from my apartment where sun comes in is what faces the academy. And I am at eye level. So when you said that nobody's apartments are being entombed because they'll be building on the property line, in the past, when they have had events where they put a tent up, a marquee, at the property line, it's always been shocking how blunting that would be to lose that view and the light that comes in from my window. A related question, because the American Academy says that they want to construct this because of compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. If they have a plan for expanding their programming, how will people come to this neighborhood with the condition of the subway station on the one train where there are no elevators? I'm 64 years old, and my days, I've done many baby carriage carryings with ladies who have their baby carriages and strollers and cannot climb the stairs alone. But I can't do that anymore because of my age. And people are always talking about not just the flooding, which they seem to be trying to mitigate, but the ability to have people come visit our neighborhood who have disabilities. If it's a problem at the Academy, Americans with Disabilities, why is it not a similar concern at our subway station? So those are my...
Yeah, and it would be a mistake to think it's not a concern at our subway stations. The community board goes through capital and expense budget priority ranking every year. And, every year, the accessibility of the subway stations are among the projects, and the 157th Street project, as I recall from our meeting only like last month, was something that was ranked very high in the process. So I think last year as well, the MTA and city planning presented some initiatives to further accelerate making more of the stations accessible. So it is something that the community board is very familiar with and very focused on. And quite frankly, one of our former board members who passed away, Edith Prentice, as much as she liked and appreciated the architecture of all of the buildings at the Audubon Terrace complex, was always a little annoyed if there were any events that the community board was having or co-sponsoring there, because it just wasn't accessible, just isn't accessible. And we have spoken to the Hispanic Society and the American Academy over the years about the plans to help increase the ADA, and it's not an easy, cheap thing to do. But they are working piece by piece to, get it done. And it's not cheap. My comment vis-a-vis entomb was using the word entomb literally. You will also notice that I said that we agreed a year ago that the solid wall was a design mistake for the very reasons that you mentioned.
Thank you.
Mitch, your hand just went up again. Was that a mistake or what? Oh, now it's down. Okay. And Doris, is that an old hand, new hand? Why isn't this working?
It's a new hand.
Okay, now it's working.
I just want to thank you and Vivian and all of you who meet as you do and spend valuable time trying to work out all of these issues that exist within our city. I just want to compliment you and say thank you very, very much. That's all.
You're very welcome, and we should increase the pay of community board members by 100% from $0 to $0. So I think we just did, I don't know if that was old business or new business, but does the committee have any additional topics? If not, is there a motion to adjourn at 9:17? I see one hand and I see a hand raised from Aisha. So Aisha, what is your hand for?
No, that was seconding the motion to adjourn.
Okay, so it's 9 and now it's 9:18. The meeting is adjourned. Take care all.
Good night.
Bye-bye.